Okay, let's have a look at how we approach English language paper 1 question 3, the structural analysis question. Now, people really struggle with the idea of structure. And essentially structure comes down to a couple of things that are really important. The first one is what we call positioning, okay? And the second one is what we call experience, okay? So positioning essentially um, in structure is the concept of the audience's place. Okay, so you are placed as an audience in a particular in a way. You are made to feel a certain way. You are made to experience things in a certain order. This links us to the idea of experience. So the audience is time. So this is basically the time that the audience spends with a text. They will have something of a track through the text that does something to their experience with the time that they spend on it. So it's a timeline, and then I've done this very silly squiggly line to represent like a heartbeat, and it is this idea that there will be peaks and troughs in the experience. In terms of the audience's place, this is I guess relatedly how you're feeling as you go through the piece of writing. Okay, so your audience place will change as you go through the text. Okay, so that's essentially what structure is. It's where you as a reader are, the order of events that you are given things, the mood that you are told to have, the first impression that you are given. It's all about the reader's experience. And there are a few nice ideas that I like to start with when it comes to approaching it. So Cool Spider is the acronym that I use, and it gives you a few things to talk about, even if you're kind of struggling to write about something to begin with. So the C is for contrasts. The O is for the opening. The second O is for the order of events. The L is for length of sentences. Then we move on to spider, and we have S for shifts, P for the classic paragraphing. I'm going to talk about all of these in a second. The I is for implications. The D is for discourse type. The E is for ending, and the R is for repetition. Okay, so Cool Spider allows you to engage with a bunch of different things. So contrasts are, at the word level, if we have words next to each other that conflict with one another, they are oxymorons. We have juxtaposition, which is anything on a grander scale. And the purpose of contrast and why we look out for contrasts is contrast serves to increase the selfness of anything. So for example, if you have a very large spider, okay, and you put it next to a really small man, it makes not only the spider seem much larger than it was already, but it makes the man seem even smaller than he was already. Okay, so when you are using contrast, you serve to emphasize any particular place in which you contrast with something. Okay, so in writing, you would often see kind of a particularly jovial character strolling past a funeral, for example, and that sense of contrast is a structural feature where the writer has placed these things with different moods and how they conflict with one another, emphasizing both the joviality of that guy and the sadness of the funeral. Okay, now the opening and the ending, and I'll talk about these ones together. we're essentially talking about impressions, okay? Impressions. So the opening of a text is the first impression that you are given, okay? So first impression is clearly something that the writer wants you to focus on. You are being positioned as the reader, as someone who is focusing on something. And the ending is the final image, okay? The final enduring image, the thing that you are left with, that you dwell on after reading, okay? So what is the purpose of the ending? Why has the ending been phrased in that way? Why has it been left there? Is it a cliffhanger, etc.? Okay, so the opening and the ending, really valid things to talk about, and they're probably the easiest things to talk about when it comes to structure. Okay, then we're on to the order of events. Okay, so is it going to be chronological? Is it going to be told through flashbacks or any other non-linear approach? That's the opposite of chronological. Okay, so non-linear, not going along the line that you would expect at the timeline. And the order of events is quite significant because if you are given the ending at the start, then what is there to kind of hook a reader throughout and engage them and sustain their engagement, particularly if they've been given the ending at the start? Well, if we're given the ending at the start because of this non-linear narrative, then we need to think, what's holding our attention until we get to that end point again? If we're going to go way back in time and build towards it, well, is it the mystery behind how we got there, for example? If it's being told in chronological order, how quickly or slowly? So pace comes into this. How quickly are we getting to where we are going? And we're going to pick up that idea in a minute as well. Length of sentences. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to say that this is a risky move. Okay. If you talk about the length of sentences, unless you have something really interesting to say, I probably wouldn't bother. As an examiner, I see people trying to talk about sentences in their essays all the time, and they rarely say anything of merit. However, if you do say something really interesting, or you do have something really interesting to say, you don't want to miss out on it. So let's say you've got yourself a series of short sentences, and it's also told during a very tense moment, then of course you can comment on how those short sentences are creating that effect. I mean, alternatively, if you've got a really long sentence followed by a really short sentence, then of course you can talk about that short sentence and how it can be jarring and why that short sentence. What you would have to do when you're talking about length of sentences is you would have to comment on why that short sentence is so short. What is it doing to this rhythm that has been created here, and why that particular moment? Okay, so it's always, it's always a dangerous move just to talk about the length of sentences. Same when it comes to paragraphing, length of paragraphs. As long as you can say something really interesting, however, it's going to be a valid place to go. Shifts. Okay, so shifts are changes. Okay, I went with shifts because otherwise it would be cool Kapider, which makes no sense. But shifts are changes, and that can be in terms of tone, it can be in terms of time, it can be in terms of the focus of the story, it can be in terms of discourse type that we'll come on to. But any change is it's a removal of control and stability for the reader. You are basically handing over power to the writer when you are reading, because you might want to get on with the story and find out what happens next. But if the writer decides to take a different direction, focus on something different, slow down the time, change the tone into something more humorous when it was getting quite dark, interrupt with a different discourse type, then all of those sorts of things remove your control and an ability to move forward with the story. Maybe that creates tension, maybe it creates frustration. The paragraphing, okay, so that's very much linking to focus, but it can also be if we have, for example, isolated one-liners, they stand out. You have to talk about them. They are there for a reason. If you instead have, epic ones, then of course you can comment on those. Paragraphing, again, it's a little bit like length of sentences. It is risky to talk about if you've got nothing to say. So don't talk about it if there's nothing to say about it. It's not a free bit of structural analysis. It's one of those things realistically to avoid unless there's something really valid to say. Now, implications. This is usually when we have foreshadowing, we have motifs. It's this idea of planting seeds. Okay, if we plant a seed or a clue early on in a story, we're expecting it to develop over the course of that text, maybe be dug up later, or maybe be referred to in a little bit more detail later. So implications are where something is implied but not fully realized yet, okay? And it garners your interest. It makes you want to explore that little mystery that's been planted there. So you've been given a clue, something has been evidently foreshadowed, there is a motif that has been introduced that is being gradually developed. Those are implications, and they are planted at the story in different places with different degrees of rigor and detail to kind of hold your interest. Now, discourse type, it relates to shifts, because when you change a discourse type from, say, narrative when you're telling the story to descriptive when you are describing a scene, to dialogic, where you are having a conversation between characters, to reflective, where a narrator is thinking about things. All of these, particularly, and in fact, let's just kind of break them down, particularly where you have these ones, these, descriptive, dialogic, reflective, they are disruptive to the narrative. And you see this all the time in writers. They will choose to have a bit of story and something really interesting about to happen, and then they will delay it. Okay, so let's say that someone is, a classic example, cliffhanger, someone is hanging by their fingers from the edge of a cliff. Instead of going and then they fell, and then they got pulled up, they'll have them hanging from a cliff, and then they will go back in time, or they will describe the air around the fingers, or they will have a character up on the other side of the cliff desperately making a phone call and having a conversation with someone about the situation. All of that, it serves to delay things, okay? So if we think back to what I was saying before about pace for the order of events, this is very, very relevant here, because if we can delay things, i.e. slow down the pace, then we hold our audience's interest even more and we frustrate them. And then finally, repetition is really easy. If something is high frequency, then it is important. Quite simple. It's very easy to talk about repetition. Now, if you think that that's a lot, I completely agree. And you might want to limit it to the things that you can almost always talk about. So your contrasts, your opening, your repetition, and your ending. So your core, C-O-R-E. Contrast, so any time where there is an oxymoron, juxtaposition, or any kind of change where things are put next to each other that are different. Your opening, particularly when compared with your ending, and any ideas that have been repeated. Now, these are the easiest things to talk about and the things that you're most likely to find in every text that you come across. And if you struggle to remember Cool Spider, you've at least got the core ideas of structure for things to look out for. Now, when it comes to writing this, when it comes to actually writing up your response, it's just like a language analysis. You would say, This is what the writer is doing to us as readers. Here is how they are doing it. And here is the effect that it has on our experience reading it. Okay, so your typical kind of point, quote, comment response, or point evidence analysis, or whatever, it's a three-part structure where you're saying the writer does this, this is how, and this is the impact. Really, really simple. You don't need to do anything strange. When we get on to having a look at a model response, you'll get to see kind of the nitty-gritty of how that's laid out linguistically. All right, good stuff, you guys.